Hey guys, I can't believe it. Another independent journalist is being targeted by the FBI, scheduled to be prosecuted after extensively covering the events of January 6th of this year. His name is Steve Baker, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist, is the name of his blog. And I'm about to bring him on live for a live interview about what is going on. He has forwarded to me some of the emails from prosecutors on this case who are upset now that he just went public about being targeted. So they're really not going to like me for interviewing him live here and just putting it all on blast. But we need to understand what the FBI is up to. On Wednesday of this week, I interviewed someone who had a YouTube who was then targeted by the FBI for his YouTube. I previously covered Project Veritas getting their doors knocked down by the FBI. This is alarming, and so we're going to track every step of what the FBI is up to as we really question whether the FBI is actually trying to trample down the First Amendment. So before I bring up Steve Baker and hear from him directly and really look into what he was covering, because he was also covering what the government was up to leading up to 1/6. We're going to talk about all of that. But first, a word from the sponsor, Glow with Ivory. As far back as history can track, humans have tried to reverse aging. We hate seeing our faces age, and while some solutions do work, most of them fall short. However, myself and thousands of others have successfully watched our skin look and feel younger before our very eyes. Our secret is called Ageless Glow by BioTrust. I have tried countless anti-aging serums. For me, this is the only one that seems to work. Three things happened when I started taking this. Firstly, my skin appeared firmer. This took years off my appearance. Secondly, my complexion brightened. I now have a more youthful glow. Third, my skin became softer and smoother. It's as if my skin firmed up. If you want to look and feel younger, don't sleep on Glow with Ivory. I can't recommend it enough. The results have been nothing short of breathtaking. Take Glow with Ivory and get your glow back this Black Friday. Go to glowwithivory.com or click the link below to get up to 38% off your order. Glowwithivory.com, link in description. And with that, I'm going to bring up Steve Baker and get right into this conversation. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ivory. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. I'm really alarmed that the FBI is after you, and I'm really wanting to know why. Now, the official charging document hasn't been filed. I just tried to look up your court records. Nothing's on the record yet. So what's going on? Take me through when the FBI first reached out to you.
The FBI did not bother reaching out to me until about 9.5 months after January 6th. It was late September before I got the first call from them. When they called, I said, well, what took you so long? Because I've been anticipating it for 9 months. At that point, I had come to the conclusion that maybe because of my record of being a journalist for as many years as I've been doing this, and as many years as I've been a writer and writing about politics and analyzing politics and of every possible topic, that maybe they were just going to leave me alone based on my First Amendment protections. But I did get that call in late September. They scheduled a voluntary cooperative interview with me, which myself and my attorney agreed to. We showed up about a month later for that interview at the FBI headquarters there in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And what ended up happening is about 15 minutes before the interview was to take place, they got a call from DC, from the Attorney General's office or from their headquarters, either one, but they were told to stand down, that they could not do the interview. It turns out that there's a statute in the Code of Federal Regulations which protects press from being investigated by the FBI or any other agency without express written consent from the Attorney General's office itself. So they acquired that letter, and then about a month later, so this was in sometime in October, we actually did go back in, and we had that interview with them, and here we sit today. After that interview, there was the potential that charges could still be filed because of, as you know, most people are being charged with some sort of trespassing thing or interfering with the government process or duties that day. So they did say that that possibility still existed, even though I was in a cooperative mode at the time. And then we were notified just a few days ago that, in fact, that the Attorney General was going to go forward with charges against me, and that we could expect those to be filed next week.
And what are they charging you with?
Well, this is where it's getting a little bit crazy, because there's first of all, the groundwork has to be laid. I was at the January 6th events strictly to cover the event. I'd announced to all my readership online that I was going to go and I was going to cover it. And my readership knows for a very long period of time that I've never been a Trump supporter. And so I wasn't there as a Trump acolyte or a Trump, a fanboy. I didn't show up with any Trump gear on. Matter of fact, I was wearing this hat right here that day. All I had with me was a camera, a tripod, an interview microphone, and I intended to cover whatever was going to happen that particular day. They were obviously dealing with the alleged election fraud issues. There were supposed to be some big earth-shaking announcement that day. That did not happen. Trump said something wild was going to happen. I don't think he anticipated either what exactly did take place that day. But nevertheless, as the story developed, we followed the story, and I followed the story up to the Capitol and into the Capitol. So once the doors were opened and people were allowed into the building, I followed that crowd into the building, and I got some incredible footage from inside. I didn't obstruct the government operation or the processes of government that day. I was very quiet. I did no parading, which is one of my charges. There was a grandmother down in Florida that was convicted for parading, marching through the Capitol with carrying a Trump flag or something of the sort, and she got 5 months in prison for doing that.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and so none of that happened. All I did was carry my camera and stayed off to the side and just chronicled the events as they transpired. So after that day was over, I set myself to writing a very, very exhaustive, long, detailed timeline of what I saw that day. And I published that about 5 or 6 days after January 6th, and then started posting some of my videos as well. And what ended up happening was I expected, because of the quote unquote trespassing charge, that I might get a call at some point. It never happened until 9.5 months later. And so
you were initially charged with trespassing?
Well, no, that's one of the charges that I'm going to be charged with. But then we get to the most obscene charge of all. I'm actually being charged with something called, and I can jump over and I want to read this to you real quick. I'm being charged with something called interstate and foreign travel or transportation in aid of racketeering enterprises. You hear that? Interstate racketeering is what I'm being charged with, in addition to the traditional or typical trespassing and interfering with government operations charges that are taking place. And the only thing that we can think of, because myself and our attorneys are scratching our heads right now until we see the formal charges and see the actual written complaint, we're not going to know what exactly is that they're basing this upon. But our assumption is that because news agencies reached out to me and then purchased and or licensed some of my video for broadcast on their television. My videos have showed up everywhere from that New York Times documentary to Newsmax. Some European news agencies have used it. I've even been contacted by a documentary film company that is using quite a few of my videos in their documentary. So because I have received financial compensation for that, that's the only nexus we can think of to charge me for crossing state lines for the point of profiting from a criminal event.
That's a horrifying attack on the First Amendment, as far as I can tell, because you're a journalist, the same as any Getty Images photographer would be a journalist.
Exactly.
Getty Images dispatches their photographers across the world. They photograph pictures and then license those out to media organizations across the world.
Yeah, it happens every day on every corner of the planet.
Right. That's stunning. Well, I'm shocked if that's the case. And I'm very curious to hear prosecutors explain why on earth they would charge an independent journalist with racketeering.
Well, as I said, we're waiting on the formal complaint, and until we see that, we have no idea exactly what they're basing that on. We're just assuming that that is the only possible nexus for them to be able to come up with that. But beyond that, it's 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 absolutely flabbergasting considering what I didn't do that day. I was not involved in any violence whatsoever. I was not involved in any property damage. I never pressed the police line. I never so much as taunted a law enforcement officer. I didn't open my mouth. I didn't have any flags. I didn't have any Trump paraphernalia on. I all I did was use my camera, documented the violence that was taking place outside the Capitol building, and then as I said, once the doors were open and the crowds began to surge inside, I eventually joined that crowd and moved in myself. And then I kept my mouth shut inside that building. I didn't involve myself in any chanting. There's a lot of chant, USA,
Right.
USA, and all kinds of other chanting that was going on inside the Capitol building, and I never participated in any of that. They have me in hundreds or maybe even, God knows, thousands of other people's cameras that day. So there's absolutely no proof whatsoever that I was engaged in any of those illegal activities whatsoever. And as I said, as far as the racketeering charge, we'll just have to wait and see what they're basing that upon.
Well, I hope your attorney has copies of other people's footage of you inside the Capitol.
Well, that'll certainly be made available to us during discovery, because they did have, during the FBI interview that I participated in, they did have, in fact, screenshots of me, in their files that they were showing me. Is this you? Is this you? Yes. And that had come from other people's cameras.
And okay, so all of us have seen the very professional photos and videos from inside the Capitol that day. We have seen all of those because there was a lot of press in there. You were among many members of the press who went right on in with the rest of the protesters. And
Yeah.
that's the role of the press, to document history.
Yeah, it is. And there were certainly inside that building, there were the quote unquote credentialed Capitol press that had, they wear the badges, and they were there. A lot of them were cowering in closets and under benches during the incursion inside when people came in.
Right.
But
Actually, I remember watching the news that day, and before anyone knew this was happening, I was watching a White House reporter, a correspondent, doing a report from inside, and suddenly she's like, "Okay, something's happened." In the middle of her report, she's like, "I guess we
right.
got to go." And so, yeah, there was press already in there
Yes.
reporting, but then we saw other press with their cameras going right through the doors. There's
Yeah,
video.
and we also know that there were other independent journalists like myself that are not associated with any particular agency or news group, who also entered the building that day, who were actually more incursive than myself, more intrusive rather than myself, in terms of what areas they penetrated. They're no more, no more or no less an independent member of the press than myself, in that they also took video footage, wrote stories about it. They've done podcasts, and to our knowledge, none of those have yet been charged. That we know that some of them have been interviewed by the FBI, like myself, but we don't know of any of the others that have been charged yet.
So other than asking if that's you in photos, what questions were the FBI asking you?
Well, it was a 2-hour interview, and they were very interested. One of the primary areas that they were really drilling down on me with was whether or not I knew that I was entering a restricted facility. And of course, my answer to them was, of course, I understood that while these barricades were up and while tear gas was being fired and flashbangs, I even had one hit me in the leg. And while all these other preventative measures were being taken by the DC police and by the Capitol Police to keep people out, there was a moment in time at about 2:15 p.m. that day where suddenly they received orders to pull back. And I know that they received orders to pull back because those cops don't make these decisions on their own. And we've seen from other people's videos as well that there was a specific moment in time where they dropped their defenses. They walked away from the line, from the bike rack barricades. They pulled back, And at that moment is when people started going up the steps and going in doors that also had been opened from the inside.
Oh yeah, I viewed cell phone video of officers walking down from the Capitol steps and saying we've been ordered to draw down, I guess.
I have video myself of dozens of Capitol Police officers after they were told to stand down, just standing around talking on their phone. Some of them were texting probably their wives, which I don't blame them. They'd just been taking a beating for over an hour, and they were probably, from what was being broadcast on television, they were probably texting their wives and telling them that they were okay. I don't
Right.
blame them for that. But the point being is that a fully armed police force of more than one agency was standing aside on their phones as this unarmed crowd was then moving inside. That's obviously a sign that they had been told, because they would not have themselves made that decision. Those frontline
Right.
officers did not have the authority to do that.
Well, we're looking at your blog here, The Pragmatic Constitutionalist. I have a link to your press release actually in the description here if people want to check that out. Your press release about the FBI coming after you. Uh, so this is one of the articles that you did. That this is the extensive article showing kind of what you witnessed that
Hmm.
day, and it's an extensive article. But the end is interesting to me here because you said, I also saw and videoed some things I can't yet share. I've been advised not to for my own protection. Why? Because I was told not to trust anyone right now. I suppose the FBI is interested in what you haven't shared.
Yeah, I'm certain that they are, because in a subsequent article to this, I did make references to some of the things that I'm aware of from January 6th on. Obviously, like a lot of reporters, I've been somewhat obsessed with this. I've had a two-track mind for the last year, and that is all things COVID and then all things January 6th. And in my own personal investigations and research into what was happening, not only before the event, during the event, and after, I have stumbled upon, uh, well, the best way to say it is I have unnamed sources who have led me to believe, and I do believe, in fact, that there were other agencies involved that day, not only in the pre-plan, not necessarily, I shouldn't say pre-planning of the event, but they were participating in some manner, in some way. And I'm not the only one. Even mainstream news articles, I carried with me into the FBI meeting that day my own folder, and I had printed out news stories from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Reuters of the FBI's foreknowledge of what could potentially happen that day. And in addition to that, I've also learned that quite possibly there were other agencies embedded in the crowd that day. For what purpose? I have my theories, but I'm not prepared to go public with those either yet.
Wow. And then what you go on to say here in the first WUSA Channel 9 interview, that's a channel located in Washington D.C. I was asked if I supported what I saw. I said yes, 100%, not the senseless violence and death, but the spirit of resistance against the oppressive state. Even if misplaced and misapplied on that day, their camera placement had me framed with the Capitol dome behind. I turned my head and pointed over my shoulder and said to the reporter, there's a darkness in that building, and what happened today may have just been a test run. The next time they may return with better prepared, a million gun march of sorts. And if they come back in the same numbers, there's no way they can be stopped. We may have heard the first shot today. She responded, literally, they didn't use that exchange on
No,
the
they did
11
not.
o'clock news.
No, they did not. They took. I did two interviews that day with WUSA. I did one there on the Capitol grounds after I had exited the building, and then I did a subsequent one later that afternoon with the actual anchor of their evening news program. All total, they interviewed me for about 30 minutes and cut all of that down to about 30 seconds and made me look like a jackwad in that in their editing.
Wow, I'm not surprised.
No.
I used,
Well, it was a lesson learned.
yeah, that's the corporate news for you, the industry I just came from. And then here's your other article that you have on this, really digging into who was up the chain as far as allowing the violence that did occur to happen. Now, first of all, okay, obviously I wasn't there that day, but from observing, it looks like the front of the Capitol was more peaceful and the back is where most of the violence took place.
It seems to be that there was violence on both sides. It was just more visible, wider spread, because in the front side of the Capitol, and I was on the back side, but on the front side, the crowds were so compact and pressed in up against the steps and the doors, you couldn't really see a lot. Now we've seen video subsequent to that there was little tiny pockets of violence going on, but on the back side, it was a much longer line because they had a long line of a bike rack back there. And so you had this very, very small microscopic percentage of the attendees in DC that day that were actually participating in violence. And then you had on that same level, hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more people waving flags and chanting and that sort of thing. And then down below that, around the reflection pool were literally tens of thousands of people were gathering there that had moved over from the ellipse and the Washington Monument lawn from the rally itself that had come up to the Capitol.
Yeah, there's still this big debate about what really happened that day because you see the little old ladies inside the Capitol, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that
Yeah.
wasn't violent. How did she get in there, and how is she just chilling in there if it was that violent? But sounds like there was initial violence and people breaking the glass, and then the police stood down, and then the peaceful protesters were like, well, I guess we can go right through. And I also have video, which if you click my Rumble link down below, I have it in my report on Rumble of police waving people in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, this is not a decision that these frontline officers can make. This is a command decision that came from somewhere up the chain. And my theory, as I write in this particular article here, and I hope everyone will go read this, is that there was someone watching the events as they unfolded, and I referred to it as, like, a rope a dope, the old Muhammad Ali move, where they let him in, he lets them in, lets them in, lets them in, up against the ropes, and then then he unleashes what he intended to counter with. And I think that what they countered with that day was the greatest PR blitz against a particular political faction that has ever been unleashed before in American history, as a result of these violent, these very small handful of violent agents, as well as the so-called agent provocateurs, which I caught on camera in multiple locations and waving people into violence, encouraging them to come in with their bullhorns, doing that thing that agent provocateurs do. And then even inside the Capitol, continuing the process of directing people where they needed to go and what they needed to be involved in, that sort of thing. But we do have evidence from other sources, as you know, it's growing now, that the FBI had either quote unquote informants, or they had plants inside some of these groups that were in fact part of the so-called conspiracy, be that the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, or other militia groups, none of which I know are involved or am involved with myself, or I don't even, I've never even known a member of any of those groups, which is why I'm not getting a charge in that regard. But the point being is that at some point somewhere there were command orders being given and directed to the DC police and the Metro police, or the Capitol Police rather, to allow people to come in that first set of barricades, and then allowed them up to the second level, and then somebody told them to stand down and allowed them inside the doors. And my contention has always been that this violence didn't need to last more than 30 or 60 seconds, because all this fully armed police force had to do was draw their weapons and draw down on the crowd, and it would have been over. And this would have never happened. In fact, I told the FBI officers in my interview that day, I said, if you guys had done your job, and when I said by you, I don't mean you too, but I said by your agency and the other agencies that are tasked with protecting which is ostensibly the most secure building in America. If you had done your jobs that day, I wouldn't be sitting in this effing interview room right now. And so that is a reality that America needs to wake up to, is that first of all, an armed with sticks, flagpoles, and bear spray against a fully armed police force, that does not an insurrection make. So something else was happening that day that allowed this to transpire step by step by step until ultimately they had the story and they had the narrative created that they needed.
It's very strange that they just let everyone go home and then created a big list of pictures of people there and said, okay, we have hundreds of people that we have to track down across America because we
Yeah.
let them all go home that day.
Right. And I will tell you that for several months I checked that photo lineup a couple times a week, and then once every 2 weeks, and then once a month. And then because my photo never showed up, I just assumed that I was not a target because of my history as a journalist. And then one day I got the call.
Wow. Wow. Well, here down in this article, you have an interesting little paragraph here. Since that day, my conversations with the aforementioned military and law enforcement personnel have revealed to me the very high probability that both special forces and operatives and U.S. Marshals were mixed in with the crowds that entered the Capitol building. I asked them that question about possible undercover professionals because of the 5 very distinct types of persons I observed in the crowd that day. And one of the groups that you observed were these people who looked very professional in there. So, anyway, you're talking about having sources in the military and law enforcement kind of tipping you off about some things like this. Um, have you been investigating the FBI's role in possibly helping create this supposed insurrection?
No, I'm not investigating that. There are, as you know, there are other groups doing that. There are other journalists who have been on the front line of that, and we've seen a lot of their work already. We've seen the videos of these so-called unindicted co-conspirators that were actually uh, point men. They were frontline agent provocateurs both the evening before in the gatherings and rallies the evening before on January 5th, as well as the very, very first barricade breaches on the day of the 6th, in which these particular provocateurs were giving directions, telling people that they needed to get inside the Capitol building, and they were waving people in. That their faces are clear as a bell. There's dozens and dozens of videos of these guys, and these guys have not been arrested at all. In fact, they're not being identified, and they're not showing up on the FBI Most Wanted page, even though their faces obviously instigating and providing direction to those who were breaching those lines, and yet they've not been arrested. And it is obviously believed that these guys were either informants, plants, agents themselves, or some type and some method they were working directly with the FBI.
Yeah, I'm really curious as to what's going to happen with that. If you're instigating and getting the crowd inside, why haven't you been arrested? So,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and there are some really sharp people on that particular detail at present.
well, it's really interesting. What was it, Monday, that you put out a press release alerting the public that you're being targeted by the FBI?
Yes, it was this Monday. We made the decision that we needed to get in front of this and to generate as much publicity as possible. So we put together myself and a couple of my attorney and another individual. We cooperated and put this press release together and started sending it out on Monday. I'm sure somehow you got it,
Yeah,
and
one of
that's
my
why I'm here
viewers
today.
emailed it to me. I'm glad they
Wow.
did.
Yeah, that's great.
It's we do not want to be seeing journalists targeted by federal agents, and maybe federal agents think they can get away of targeting someone because they're a citizen journalist, because they're not from a big fancy establishment news media agency.
They
Again,
they yeah they asked me that day. They asked me if I went to college as a journalism major. They asked me if I was credentialed with any of the known news services, and I said no, the First Amendment doesn't have a stipulation that that's required. And they
Exactly.
went, they went, yeah, yeah, okay.
Exactly. And all the public needs to realize that the free press that does not just include ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox News, CNN, and the papers. The free press, journalism, it can't be categorized into certain corporations. Every citizen gets to be a journalist as soon as they start uh, synthesizing down truth and providing it to the public in a comprehensive way. You're a journalist when you start putting out information to the public.
Every news agency started with one person who
Yeah.
had an idea,
Exactly.
and they, they had they either had a pen, a printing press, or something, and started in a back room and started churning out pamphlets or whatever. Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, whatever. They started churning out pamphlets. They started churning out newspapers. They eventually grew and hired staff, and they hired investigative reporters and people that follow the weather and follow the sports and things of that nature, and they grew in that regard. The difference, between myself and let's be honest, in some of these cases where people have been arrested for trespassing, they are claiming that they are citizen journalists, and it's a bit of a defense of convenience in that they suddenly became a journalist that day. But I've got a dozen years of thousands of articles I've written on every possible topic, politically related and otherwise, before I ever arrived there on that day.
And look, even establishment media can get charged with trespassing. Like, just because you're a journalist doesn't mean you can trespass.
Right, but the point being is that there has to be clear evidence that they are entering a restricted space. And what happened, as I said before, so long as that police line was resisting those who were trying to break through, and I was covering what they were doing, not involved in that in any way myself at all. But as I was covering that, as I said, there was a moment in time where that resistance stopped and they pulled back in a coordinated and instant point in time. And only after that did I look up and see this mass of humanity start moving up those under those scaffolding steps, the scaffolding that was erected for the inaugural address. And they began moving up those steps that were underneath those scaffolding. And I watched that happen. And then I eventually followed those crowds in.
Well, I mean, if they arrest you, they've got to arrest all the media who was in there.
This is, who the most interesting media there that day, or the most interesting media presence there that day, were the credentialed press photographers on the front line of the battle, battle line, the battle skirmish line that was taking place. The credentialed press photographers who were there knelt down really close, getting those great shots with that really expensive gear. You could see their credentials hanging off, on their lanyards. And those press photographers were wearing full riot gear, helmets, gas masks, and they were in place and there before Trump finished his speech.
Whoa. They were tipped off about something, huh?
Yeah. This was the most stark evidence I think that I have that somebody knew something was or could happen of that nature, and these guys came prepared. These were not Capitol press photographers who suddenly went, "Oh, crap! There's a riot, there's an insurrection, there's violence taking place," and then they ran home and got their their battle gear, their protective gear and helmets and flak jackets and all and gas masks, and then came back out. No, they were there, they were placed, they were ready for this to take place.
Wow, that's very interesting. Well, I think it's really interesting that, when James O'Keefe and Project Veritas were targeted, their doors knocked down. James O'Keefe received a memo saying, please don't go public about this. Memo from prosecutors asking him to stay hush hush about the fact he's being targeted by the FBI. Well, he didn't. He does a YouTube about two of his journalists getting their doors knocked down, and the very next day, his personal door gets knocked on by 10 FBI agents, and he gets handcuffed, and his phones get taken the day after he went public against prosecutors' wishes.
Right.
So now, in your case, you decided to go public, and then your attorney gets an email from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yes.
And I'm going to share that email with my viewers because it's reminiscent of what happened to the Project Veritas journalists.
Hopefully you have the email addresses redacted.
I don't
Oh.
know how to share an actual email screen. I was just, or with redaction.
Yeah,
I don't
just
know
read 'em
how
out.
to share an email screen with redaction
I gotcha.
because I can't. With this platform, I can't show like an image where I blur things out. I just have to show the whole website.
Why don't you read that off instead?
Oh, so as not to put your attorney on blast?
Yeah, we don't want to do that. We don't want to dox him.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to be really transparent and just show people all my emails and everything, but I've got nothing to hide. No, I don't have any confidential sources right now on there. But anyway, if that's your wish, I'll read this email from Anita Eve. Anita Eve. You don't want me to give her email address?
No, let's
She's
not do
with
that.
the U.S. Department of Justice. Anita Eve emails Steve's attorney, and she says, Matt, I appreciate the communications that we engaged in last week, but I'm not thrilled with this press release that was forwarded to me today. And then she sends your press release, which I have linked in my description. And your press release is entitled Independent Journalists to be Prosecuted for Coverage of January 6th Events. And you're putting the FBI on blast. You're showing that the FBI is targeting you, and she's not happy about that.
Yeah, and let's be a little bit more clear too as well. I don't believe that I'm being targeted by the FBI. I believe that I'm being targeted by Biden's Department of Justice because we have this ongoing investigation. We have Pelosi's select committee or unselect committee, as it turned out, to investigate this. And there's a lot of pressure right now on these agencies to make these type of arrests and indictments happen. And because I've been very upfront from the beginning of this whole affair with my blogs, with my videos, and subsequent stories that I've written and commentaries that I've made about that, and then of course my additional investigations that I've not gone completely public with, that I believe that that's why I'm now in their focus.
Yeah, it might really boil down to that one highlighted line that I showed in your first article I showed, where you admitted you have stuff that you don't want to show.
And which is why they have also indicated that they now want my devices.
Wow, they want your devices. They are trying to snatch those phones. So your attorney goes on. He responds to her. Mr. Baker is obviously feeling threatened by the charges and is using his First Amendment right to garner support. I know he will continue to cooperate, but I expect he'll be actively blogging throughout this whole process. I believe he stated in his interview he has about 10,000 followers on his blog, The Pragmatic Constitutionalist.
About 40,000, but
yeah. 40,000. And then he goes on to say, well, I don't agree. I don't always agree with his opinion. It's not fair to ask him to be silent while he endures federal prosecution.
Yeah, so I very much appreciated his response.
And then she responds to that. By the way, Anita Eve, her title is Assistant U.S. Attorney, Capitol Riots Detailee, U.S. Attorney's Office. So her response, quote, I have absolutely no objection to Mr. Baker exercising his First Amendment rights. He can continue that as often as he so desires. My concern is what impact this will have with the judge who gets assigned to his case. Also, I may make use of his commentary at some future proceeding. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware. Ooh, so she's got like some sort of subtle threat going on against you.
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of discussions, myself with the attorney. In fact, we had a 3-hour video conference call today with my attorneys, and this topic came up and was discussed at length. And we believe that they just don't want me talking. It's not that they have the right to shut me up, short of some gag order after I'm charged or whatever. And there's no justification for that either that we know of. But they know that I've been very upfront in terms of the way I've analyzed this. I do believe that my second long blog that I wrote, Who Was Up the Chain on January 6th, gave them enough indication. Well, you know how they talk about when you're over the target, that's when the flak is, greatest. And I think that blog was over the target, because I call out both Pelosi and McConnell in that, because that's their building, and nobody's going to do anything with that building without their permission and their oversight, their direction.
Wow. You're too on to what's really happening.
Maybe.
You can't be letting the public know this stuff, really. But gosh, I'm just very concerned to see you getting targeted. The man I interviewed Wednesday getting targeted. All of you. It's been the FBI. The FBI that came after Project Veritas. The FBI knocked in the door of Austin Steinbart, who I understand is very controversial for his YouTubes. I don't care about what he was saying on his YouTubes. It's his free speech to be able to say those things. And for the FBI to knock down his door and take his 2 phones is uncalled for. And if you read the FBI charging document in his case, they're accusing him of extortion because he told his viewers to go call and email a company. That is pretty concerning. And it's like they're coming up with these weird ways to target independent voices, journalists. I mean, he's not even really considered a journalist. He's a YouTuber. And now they're after you. I'm just going to continue to cover every single person exercising their free speech who's getting targeted by the FBI. There's too many right now. It's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, I think it's important for everyone to understand this distinction from where the targeting and the orders are coming from. Just as I believe that there were more important and more powerful players up the chain on the day of January 6th who had either orchestrated or after the event began saying, okay, now let's let this happen. Let's let this happen. Bring them in. Now we've got a narrative that will be unlike any narrative in the history of American politics. But the point being is that the same thing is true of these other investigative agencies. Now we have those of us that love the Constitution, and we talk about the oaths that these agencies and these individuals in these agencies have taken. We would like for some of these agents to be able to say, sorry, this guy's protected by the First Amendment. I'm not going to go knock on his door. We would like for that to happen. My question for them, and I wrote a very long, essentially a well, it wasn't a Wittenberg letter nailed to the door, but what it was a manifesto about Thanksgiving and why I'm still thankful that I still have the protection of the First Amendment, and I still have the protection somewhat of our judicial process, so that I can fight for what you and I are talking about today, and we do have that First Amendment protection as members of hope, and I said this at the conclusion of my article yesterday, we would hope that those individuals would honor their oaths to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But they are, in fact, they're following orders, and they're protecting their paychecks, and they're protecting their pensions, as opposed to protecting the citizens that they've been charged to serve. And that's exactly what's happening in my case, and it's happening in the case of so many others. And that's why, frankly, I'm willing to go ahead and get on the front line of this thing and get my voice out there and fight it to the best of my ability.
Well, I'm reading the live comments from the viewers right now, and one of them made a good point to release your unreleased footage now. Since the FBI is going to get a hold of it anyway, why not release that footage?
I've actually offered it to him voluntarily. I have nothing to hide in the footage itself. may only aid them in the prosecution of other people that are being charged that day. Although it's highly unlikely, considering the thousands upon thousands of hours of video that they already have access. And we've seen in the news they have an additional 14,000 hours of video that they've never released. And that's, of course, part of that is the body cam footage from the law enforcement officers, from the videos that are taken inside the Capitol building and outside the Capitol building. There's just unbelievable amount of information that they already have. It's not likely that anything that I have is going to aid them in the prosecution. What it is going to do is it's going to aid me in my defense, because the entire time that I'm inside the building, you can see exactly what I'm doing, and you can also hear the audio that I don't even open my mouth. I'm not participating in any disruption, any chanting, any revelry at all as that's happening. I'm just recording the events as they were taking place.
Wow. So when do you expect the charges to drop against you?
We've been told that it's going to happen probably early this coming week.
Wow. Well, good luck with that. What's the name of your blog so people can go?
Yeah, the pragmaticconstitutionalist.com. I started this process a dozen years ago on Facebook, and I have about 36,000 followers on my Facebook page, which is also the Pragmatic Constitutionalist. It's amazing I'm still there and have not been deplatformed. I've had so many strikes against me, though, that they've throttled me down to nothing. I mean, it's
Wow.
just my stuff just gets out in a trickle there. So I have joined Dave Rubin's new locals community. I do have a community there. Also, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist. Your viewers can find that at thepragmaticconstitutionalist.locals.com. And that's my new home. I'm actually moving away from my blog, moving away from Facebook, as we can, get people notified of where we're transferring. But
And I think that's what I put on in my description, if you guys
Oh,
want.
fantastic. Yeah, thank you. But that's where we really want people to go, is to go to the pragmaticconstitutionalist.locals.com, because that's now the de facto home of where all of my content originates now.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to you. Hopefully the FBI doesn't come after me now.
No. Well,
What is this world we're in?
There's literally no reason for them to do so, but there's also no reason for them to be coming after me either.
Exactly. And that's why I now have cause for concern. Because look, I'm saying right now, the next journalist, the next innocent voice that the FBI comes after, I'm going to put their story on blast too. I'm going to keep highlighting this stuff. This is absurd what we're seeing happen to our First Amendment. So thank you so much, Steve. Best of luck to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And keep in touch. Keep me updated, and talk to you later.
We will do so. Thanks.
All right. Bye.